Hi everyone, welcome to another Q&A with Kareen. And this week's question is all about native plants. So Sam just sent me a note asking what native plants grow in our climate. And native plants has become a big thing in the past few years, probably thanks to this man in part, who wrote this book, Nature's Best Hope. A new approach to conservation that starts in your yard. And it's all about encouraging people, especially people who live in the suburbs, to grow as many native plants as possible. And that's a way to kind of reweave the wildlife corridors that have been lost through things like development. So why would you grow native plants in the first place? I'm sure many of you know, but I want to go through them. One, native plants require less water and maintenance. They've evolved to thrive in your particular region, right? So when we're talking about, say, the West, right, where it is much drier and we don't have a lot of precipitation during the growing season, you have these more drought tolerant plants that are able to thrive, not only survive, but thrive in the region because they're adapted. Another thing that native plants do, of course, is that they attract native pollinators and they increase biodiversity. And of course, biodiversity is something that we have lost significantly over the past many years of, again, development, rainforest destruction, you name it, all of the ecological crises that we face right now. And then, of course, native plants are a lifeline to native fauna. So for all of those reasons, you want to plant native plants. And I want to share this quote from Doug Tallamy from the book that says, "What we plant in our landscapes determines what can live in our landscapes. An American yard dominated by Asian ornamentals doesn't produce nearly the quantity and diversity of insects needed for birds to reproduce. We have 50% fewer birds than 40 years ago, and some 230 species of North American birds are at risk of extinction." So for that reason alone, right, to conserve our bird species is one reason to plant native plants. So I, back in 2018, actually, did convert most of my front yard to mostly native drought-tolerant species, some of which are medicinal. And so there are a ton of different native plants out there. And again, like I've been recommending before, the first thing that you want to do, depending on where you live, right, is go and check with your local agriculture extension, check with your local nurseries in terms of what native plants do well in your particular region. For Montana, actually, this resource from the NRCS, from the Natural Resources Conservation Service, called Montana Native Plants for Pollinator-Friendly Plantings, is a really great resource that I like to use to look up really good native plants for this particular region. But again, there's probably a similar one if you aren't based in Montana. So always look for those local resources if you can. And some of the things that I put in my front yard, just in terms of shrubs, are golden currant. Again, edible, right? Native, drought tolerant. So win-win-win. I put golden currant in my front yard. I put choke cherry, again, as edible as well, attracts pollinators, smells amazing. I also have common snowberry in there, and I also have woods rose and rabbit brush. So all of those do really well in terms of shrubs that you might consider. And a lot of people want to go for kind of a wildflower lawn of native plants, which is totally something that you can do. But I chose to add some shrubs in there, one for diversity and height. And also they take up more space, and my front lawn is rather large. And so I wanted them for that reason as well. And just again for that diversity. So those are some of the shrubs that I have in the front. I also have buffalo berry as well. And buffalo berry not only has edible berries, although they're not super delicious, but it's also a nitrogen fixer. It's also deer resistant too, because it has these big thorns on it. So depending, again, on where you're putting these plants is also going to determine a little bit what you choose. So those are some of the shrubs that I have in my front yard. I also have a Rocky Mountain juniper that was here beforehand. So again, that's a native as well, if you want some evergreen. In terms of flowers that I have in the front yard, I have blue flax, so Lewis flax. I have prairie coneflower, sorry, which is gorgeous. I have wild bee balm, also known as wild bergamot. And I also have common yarrow. I have blanket flower. I have also pale purple coneflower, smooth blue aster, showy golden eye. Those are some of the main ones, and some geranium. So again, look at some of those plants, look some of those plants up if you like the look and feel of them. Oh, I also have Rocky Mountain penstemon as well. So there are so many different varieties. Again, this resource that I mentioned is a really good one, a good place to start. And a lot of local garden centers will have native plants in their stock, right? It'll be a special area of the garden center that has the native plants. So you always want to be careful. There are various different types of bee balm, for example, but there's only one kind of native bee balm. So you want to make sure that you're getting that native variety. That native variety of, say, bee balm or yarrow as well, those are the varieties that have the most potent medicinal qualities to them as well. So those are some of my recommendations. And again, there are many, many more, like serviceberry is another great shrub that you could put in. Dotted gay feather is another great flower that you could put in. White prairie clover as well. But it's good to kind of start with a list, and don't, put all of them in one area, but you can certainly put a lot. And I recommend, and I've been meaning to do a more involved video about this to actually show you my front yard area and how I established it. But what I would recommend is actually, in order to establish it, is either getting 6-inch plugs of plants, 4-inch pots, or 1-gallon pots of plants. It's really hard to get kind of a wildflower meadow established just with seeds, especially if you're dealing with, what we deem noxious weeds like thistle or dandelion, or if you had grass there before or something like that. Oftentimes those species will outcompete the natives. And so it's good to start with something more substantial, because oftentimes seeds won't establish themselves if they're competing with other things. The other thing to keep in mind too is that seeds you'll just end up losing a lot of the seeds. A lot of them won't germinate, so it's kind of a waste of time and money is what I've found. You can do certain areas with seeds, other areas with maybe some 6-inch plugs. What I did was a variety, a combination of 1-gallon pots of some of the bigger things, and then, the rabbit brush, for example. I did 1-gallon pots, and then most of the rest of them I did 6-inch plugs, and then a certain area I did buy a wildflower mix, and I spread that in that area. So again, all sorts of different options, but that's what you can do. All right, let me know if you have any questions. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you soon. Bye.